Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gata Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gata Siciliano, your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Thank you for joining us again today. Today, I am so pleased to announce that we have such a special guest, someone whose name pops up in so much literature surrounding the psychiatric survivor movement. Chaya Grossberg is joining us today. And Chaya, I just want to say thank you, and I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you, Jen. I am also thrilled to be here. It's been so great getting to know you, and thank you for having me on your show.
Oh my God. It's been so great getting to know you. You advertise, I guess, or promote yourself as a creative and intuitive healer, and you really, really are. You have this personal touch to this process. It's a big, big process trying to get off psychiatric drugs, as you know. And I think one of the reasons why you're such a great source for this is that you have had your own experience with the psychiatric institution. As a young person, you dealt with a lot.
Yeah, definitely. For me, psychiatric meds really almost killed me. I was on about 7 of them at a time when I was 21. And I'm positive that if I had not gotten off of them, I would have been disabled forever, completely disabled, meaning like unable to think, unable to walk, unable to do basic daily hygiene,
right,
cook, or even think about eating, things like that. So I was really completely disabled by those drugs. And I'm positive I would be dead if I were still on them. So for me, this was about 15 years ago that all happened. And I did, though, have certain intuitions while I was going through that somehow it seemed to be part of my spiritual path, that I needed to go through that in order to get onto this path of helping others. Because for me, even before I went on psychiatric medications, I think I already had a pretty good intuitive understanding of that they didn't seem to me to be quite right. I didn't know how harmful they could be, though. And I think that's really important because a lot of people maybe encourage their friends and family members to take them or take them themselves without having a real understanding of how debilitating they can actually be.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we both know, they totally can destroy lives. I mean, I know personally, too, I wasn't started on so many at once, but I was just thrown around from one to the other, and then 3 at one time. And what's helping you with the side effects of one and this whole narrative that this is like health. It's just so crazy.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other piece of that is how hard they are to get off of, which, of course, you and I both know from personal experience. And I know from having worked with and spoken with thousands and thousands of people that are struggling and have struggled to get off of the meds. And that's something that, of course, many people don't know and aren't told when they start them.
In this being part of your mission, what do you come across most when you deal with people who struggle in trying to get off these drugs? Besides, I guess, like one of the main things that you deal with is withdrawal symptoms. But also, I think that there's probably an emotional factor, too, that people maybe realize that, oh, my God, I just let so much of my life go.
That's huge. It's huge because most of the people that come to me are at the point where they know what's going on with the meds affecting them and how they're being affected. And there's a lot of frustration and grief in that. A lot of people really feel that their life is going by and that there's nothing they can do about it at that moment because they can't just stop taking the meds suddenly. They have to go through this slow, tedious process. And often they have a lot of fear of having some kind of quote unquote, you could say, I don't know if it should be in quotes or not, but relapse of either, usually it's a fear of a relapse in the sense of like having to go back to the hospital or having really bad drug withdrawal symptoms again, which they've had in the past. because most people have tried to come off of the meds multiple times, maybe went too fast, maybe didn't have support, maybe did it in a way that didn't work for them, and then had some really intense experiences. So, a lot of times when people come to talk to me, they're in a place where they know they want to be free from these meds, and it feels very difficult and scary. And like you said, it can feel like for a lot of people, it does feel like this sense that life is passing by, and a very deep frustration,
Yeah.
And also this thing of like being an outsider in society, not being able to be part of society, feeling judged or self-conscious about what they're going through, because a lot of times, whether it's because of a diagnosis or the meds or the way the meds are affecting them, people often feel as though others are going to look down on them or see them as dysfunctional or as crazy or anything else. Yeah.
Right. And when you were young, I mean, you were young when you went through this too. When did it start for you? How old were you when you got wrapped up with them?
Well, I had been on a psych med when I was a teenager, but when I full on got wrapped up in this full situation, I started it when I was 20.
Okay.
So it was mostly for me, it was mostly age 20, 21, 22. And that was when I started to get off of those drugs around 22.
And you knew at that point that this was part of what you needed to help people do.
I knew that there was something of a spiritual mission in what I was going through. I didn't quite know, maybe around the age of 22, 23, when I encountered the Freedom Center, which was part of my withdrawal process, was kind of like what you just said, how you read my story and other people's stories, and it made you feel confident that maybe you could do this too. Mm-hmm. That happened for me with people in the Freedom Center.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, the Freedom Center.
The Freedom Center was a support and activist group for people who had been harmed by psychiatry. It doesn't really exist anymore, but at that time they were having meetings actually about a block away from where I lived. And they had a speak out on the street where I heard somebody say something that sounded like my story. And for me, it was also that light bulb in my head where I was thinking, I can do that too. Yeah. If this person here who's around my age just got off of these meds and is doing fine, I can do that also.
Right.
So I did start going to those meetings. And I do think as I started to come off of the meds and went to those meetings, that was when I started to get that sense that this is my purpose, because I right away felt a strong purpose in speaking about what I went through. Because the thing is that I had never believed in the whole mental illness and psychiatry paradigm until I was on all those drugs. And then my brain was so disabled by them that I started to buy into the idea that I was mentally ill and that was my identity and that I would need these drugs. I never believed it except for when I was on so many of them that I couldn't even think.
Right.
So but once I got off of them and I met the Freedom Center people who had similar experiences as me, it was very clear right away, we've all gone through this. We've all had our health messed up by these drugs. So I was very ready to just speak immediately and publicly about what I had gone through, because I knew that I wanted anyone else who might be susceptible to this to hear my story.
It's funny because that paradigm is never something that we really would find on our own. No person who wants to have a healthy life will accept generally. And this is why people are afraid to come out and say they have any kind of distress with, mental. I hate the idea of a mental illness. It's like, okay, you're not feeling well mentally. You know what I mean? You're having some mental distress. Like I always say mental distress, because I'm thinking everyone goes in and out of that. That should be embraced, that this is part of the human condition. Mm-hmm. At some point when you get pulled into their whole way, people who are accepted as normal, and there's that group of us who have all the traits of being not normal. So you then are told over and over and over, it's part of the brainwashing that you have to accept this. This is part of your biology and we must treat it. And it is the biomedical paradigm. So me too, when it first happened, I was like, this is a baloney. When are people going to realize this is like such, I knew it was bullshit, but then what was I supposed to do? Once everyone bought into it, and then I tried to get off the meds a few times, and because I did it quickly, and I was young, I was in my 20s, it was like all hell broke loose. My parents totally took over my life. I ended up in a relationship that was good at the time, but one that was very codependent because I started believing, oh, maybe I can't do things, like it's a whole, it's like if you take it on and you believe in it 100%, you're also giving so much of yourself up and also your free will, as though you can't imagine a better future for yourself, a more healthy way and achieve that. And I never believed it. I look back on my life and I'm thinking, it was basically destroyed, up until this point. Like, I feel like after I met you, moving forward now, I can have a life. Up until this very year, that still didn't seem tangible to me. But it's because I had so many abusive situations with the institution. I know that you've dealt with forced drugging, that you've been handcuffed as well to be put away. And I also want to mention, I heard that you were at Four Winds. I was at Four Winds like 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
No, it literally is like 5 minutes from my house. Four Winds. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's so close.
Yeah.
So it's this one town over. And what did you think about that place?
That was an interesting place because it was like better than a regular hospital. We had a courtyard, there was good food, and somehow for me, the people there were more relatable. Because, when I was there, I was 20, and there were a lot of people around my age who were also having some kind of spiritual experience. So for me, it was like a cross between a psychiatric institution and summer camp or something, because there was this level where it was also like a little bit fun to be there. But at the same time, and the professionals there were also a little bit more able to see me a little bit, they were still psychiatric professionals. They were still trying to pressure me to take the meds. But when I was there, also, I had the option to refuse the meds.
That I did not experience. What year were you in that hospital?
That was in 2001. It was right before 9/11 that I was going through all that.
It's amazing. I was there twice, and actually three. The third time was outpatient, but the two times I went was after that point. And the first time I did feel the same as you, that it was like, there's something about it that was okay. Like, if I had to be trapped, it wasn't the worst hospital, because I've been in some bad ones. And so that's where I was feeling. But the second time I went in, which was like a decade later, it was really bad. It was worse than the ones I went in afterwards, different hospitals.
Wow.
And I said to myself, wow, like, where did it go backwards? Like, there was a chance for that to be like a model, of how to approach, not healing, because it was still psychiatry, but it's like, the nurses were cool and like I could get through it. They had like this really cool sociologist there. I think his name was David.
What year were you there?
2006. And then it followed, I was there 2012. And that 6 years later was a big difference. Huge difference. But in 2006, which was interesting, only 5 years after you, it was interesting because there was this like one counselor or whatever he was. I guess he was a therapist, not a psychiatrist. And he would make us sit in the middle of the room on a chair.
I remember this.
You remember this guy?
Yes.
And he would be like the person that you wanted to tell off.
Yes. I totally remember this.
Yes. He was cool.
Yeah. And I remember he actually advocated for me because what I was saying to all these people was that I was not mentally ill. I was not depressed. That was the interesting thing, was that they were telling me I was depressed and I was not depressed.
Wow.
I was definitely going through something, but I was 100% not depressed and they were telling me I was depressed. So it was really strange. But so I was kind of very vocally advocating in all these groups that we were in, that I didn't want to take these meds. And he was supporting me. And the psychiatrist there, this is a story I've told, but the psychiatrist there was kind of caught between thinking, you just need to be in a better situation right now. And then on the other side, trying to get me a forced outpatient treatment, like forced drugging and go to a state hospital. It almost seemed like it was a logistical matter. Like if he could just find a place for me, he would let me go. But if he couldn't, then he was going to have to do this very severe thing. But I remember that guy, I guess his name was David, that therapist. I remember I brought his name up. I was like, because I could tell that he saw me a little bit better, a little more clearly than the others, and that he would potentially advocate for me. And I think I mentioned that to the psychiatrist, and he told me that that guy was on board. He said he's on board with, he was on board with what my narrative was, that I didn't need these meds.
That's what's sad. That like there's only one person or two people in the entire, stay that makes a person who's struggling feel like, oh, okay, I'm human.
Right. It is really sad because there are infinite people in the world who can play that role. It makes me think about Soteria House. Are you familiar with Soteria?
I am. And tell the listeners a little bit about what you know.
Yeah. So at Soteria, I think there were no meds, and it was a place where people could go, but none of the professionals there were mental health professionals. So everybody who worked there was an ordinary person.
Cool.
And often they were ordinary people who maybe had gone through something in their own life where they could maybe relate with someone who was going through things or in some kind of crisis state. And I just love that model, the model that a lot of times we need just really basic relatability. I mean, maybe that guy, David, had some training where he might have had even a more specialized kind of ability to be present and help people work through things. And, I think there are others in the mental health field that do. It's just that the hospital system itself is so corrupted and so medication centric that even if there are a lot of people in those systems that could help people and be present with them and help them move through things, the system itself doesn't allow space for that. And it doesn't allow often the space for somebody to try to do it without being forced onto meds when they go into the hospital. So they're usually severely sedated and messed up by all these meds and changing the meds and everything. And so I think when someone's in that state, even if there are very healing and good professionals around them or non-professionals, it's hard to even receive that kind of help if you're totally doped up and out of it because you're on all these drugs.
If people really understood where it could potentially go, I don't think that as many people would be medicated or be willing to be medicated as there are, because I know that people are looking for an answer to their feelings and whatnot, but it's never in the quick fix. Like you offer, for instance, so many resources and so much good advice in your book. I want to mention, if anybody is interested in getting off of psychiatric drugs, Chaya has this awesome book. It's called Freedom from Psychiatric Drugs, and it's a manual and workbook for psychiatric survivors. And I swear to you, if I had come across this years earlier, I would have been doing this years earlier because it's so informational. It's everything a person needs to start this journey. So if anyone's listening and they're interested in going in that direction, please look at this resource. And the things that you have helped me with being my consultant in this process have already helped. I have started my infusions.
Yay! Is that the oat straw?
I love it. It's the oat straw. And also nettle and tulsi.
Yes.
And I found like a nice little place on Etsy, like an herbalist who actually combines all those together. Having heard you talk about things and reading the advice that you give, how did you start uncovering the answers in things that a person who is into natural healing wants to know about? Because a lot of these things are not out there. Like, do you think that there is natural deficiencies in diet and, other things that if that was taken care of, there would be more balance in a person's life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one of the things I've discussed on another podcast with somebody who identifies as bipolar, but it can be applied to really any diagnosis or anybody who is extremely sensitive or has gone through trauma or is going through something, is that a lot of times we have to be full on with our self-care, like 100% in. We can't just
Right.
take a vitamin once in a while or, eat well sometimes or anything like that. We really have to actually create a whole lifestyle around taking good care of ourselves, making sure we're well nourished every day, and I guess to answer your first question about how I discovered a lot of these things has been through my own experiences and also through working with other people. So, when my clients tell me what's helping them, I do research on that and find out, what that is. And then if it seems like something that can help other people, I share it. So it's also like something, being in this world for over 15 years now, I come to, I guess almost 20 years now, I should say, I have come across so many of these things, and I am also, as a very sensitive person, always working on my own things, like my own self-care and nutrition and all the things that can help me with my own sensitivities and sleep and just feeling better in my body and in my mind and everything else. But I've also gotten to talk with herbalists and naturopaths and other professionals to hear what they think about it. When I was living in Olympia, Washington, there was an herbal clinic, and I got to talk to several very high quality herbalists about psychiatric drug withdrawal. And I was consulting with them for my own stuff, but I also got to ask them, what they thought was helpful for psychiatric drug withdrawal. And that's where I came across oat straw and tulsi as being really good ones. I think herbalists are amazingly brilliant, some of them, and many of them have worked with people with, of course, all kinds of diagnoses and the whole realm of coming off psychiatric medications. Maybe they haven't worked directly with that as much, but some have, and they understand. I noticed that people who have some kind of holistic medical training, whether it's herbalism or Chinese medicine or even naturopathy, often they have a very holistic understanding of the body and the mind and the spirit, where it's a very deep well of knowledge. If you start to go into a more holistic form of medicine, it's like a whole different paradigm than Western medicine, where anything going on is seen from the whole being. And that's the way herbalists look at it, because when they prescribe an herb, they look at the entire energetic of the person and the herb and the plant and how it might affect that person. And sometimes it's even on a spirit level, because the plants can affect our spirit. If you think of plants as having some kind of spiritual energy, which might sound a little woo-woo, but it's not really that far-fetched, because even just, people feel that sense of spirit, even just being in nature or looking at a flower or connecting with plants or gardening and things like that. So
there are so few people who are having the discussion. They have basically taken over the area of mental health. And it hurts me, especially with like what happened last year when everybody was falling apart, because it was like, just struggling year for everyone. I felt for so many people, because I'm thinking they don't really know any other options, because there are no options given by the mainstream. Someone with a bipolar or schizophrenic diagnosis in this day and age, you're only walking towards getting tracked and, taking this precision medicine, which is designed around your genes. Then it's really going to be impossible for a person to get off it, because your body is then like so acclimated to hold this, chemical in your system. How can, at least now I feel like, okay, well, it's a mess in there and all these chemicals, who knows what they're doing. So it's almost like once I start taking a little bit at a time away, I'm sure my body's going to be happy, to heal. But if it's so designed around your system, it's got to be even harder to dislodge it. And that's how they're getting everybody. You know what I mean? This sense of like, okay, we are now really able to keep you within the system. It's a forever thing. I know once they diagnosed me and started giving me all this treatment, it was like the word was forever. It was constantly forever. How can anything be forever?
Like for the rest of your life, or even for the rest of your life. Yeah. Yeah. I remember that phrase a lot also. And I remember hearing friends of mine say that I'm going to need to be on this for the rest of my life, and just feeling like, like my heart would sort of sink when I hear people say that. The other thing, though, that has come to my mind, especially in this past year with COVID, and especially in the beginning of COVID, when there was a lot of shutdown in supply of things, people were having trouble getting certain medications, whether it was psychiatric or others. You know, my cousin was having trouble getting his thyroid medication. So I was thinking along the lines of people need to be able to be free from psychiatric meds to whatever extent they can, because we also don't know at what point we might have some kind of full-on apocalyptic situation where the supplies are cut off, or where we aren't able to continuously farm our reality for these resources that enable us to live in this sort of simulation where we always have access to all these technologies at all times in unlimited amounts.
Right.
The other thing I think is that, you know, I know that you've done this a lot, and a lot of people I work with have done this, and I've done this, but I think there's something around needing to free our own consciousness as well from all these things as much as we can, because it's almost like we have to be somewhat of a social outsider, or a free thinker, or willing to be a bit of a societal dropout, basically. Because if we want to be able to be fully free, we have to be willing to create something for ourselves, even if it's just within our own personal space, our own mind, our own creative process, where we're not as reliant on the mainstream paradigms of thought.
Right.
And where we're not as attached to being accepted by those paradigms.
Right. Well, it's funny because I always kind of was like that before I fell into their hands. And I was, I was kind of proud of that. I was like traveling on my own and stuff like that. But then when everything came crashing down and I fell into their hands, that was the very thing that they thought was mentally ill. The fact that I didn't feel interested in conforming, and I never did. And I was always proud of that. And I was always like, oh yeah, well, that makes me different. And, I have talents, and, know.
And it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the control mechanisms want to keep people under their control. And that, as we become freer, they want to drag us back in, because the more people and systems they can control, the more they can farm us for their own benefit.
Right. You say that a lot of the journey today is a spiritual calling to help people. And I know that you've had other spiritual influences in your journey, such as Buddhism and your reconnection to Judaism. How did that factor in? Do you feel like those influences helped you see that there's a more spiritual component of life that I should be looking into rather than this medical component?
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I have had a spiritual connection my whole life, pretty much. Like before I was involved in this psychiatry system, I was already on a spiritual path when I was a teenager. So I've always had that line going through, and I've definitely explored different things with religions and, Judaism and other spiritual paths. And at the same time, so I think there are two parts of it. One is also having my own connection. So it's interesting because organized religion can also have some of those same qualities as organized anything, right? And they can be oppressive also, but they can also be a great place to have community in some ways, or to have some kind of spiritual community. I mean, I've been involved in so many different spiritual communities, and they have been great. Most of them have been great on some level. And I find for myself that I always still also have to have that connection to myself, where I'm still getting my own intuitions, my own answers, my own spiritual path, which isn't really, it's never going to be just about any particular religion. It might incorporate religious rituals and things into it, which I do feel a lot with Judaism, that it feels like it's part of my spiritual path. And that my spiritual path is also its own path. And a lot of the things that I do on my spiritual path don't really have that much to do with any organized religion. And they seem to more be about a purpose, like a purpose to heal, to share my truth, to teach something, to share something that might inspire another person or other people. And sometimes a lot of it for me is really about speaking my truth. And that might seem simple, but sharing something about what I've genuinely experienced, for example, with psychiatry or in other areas of life that maybe other people aren't saying, and maybe somebody out there needs to hear in order to find their own way on their journey, you know.
Personally, too, I feel like my personal spiritual path, too, is about finding what's true for me so that by living it, you know, you could just exude that aura so that other people can feel comfortable living their own path, you know? And there's none of that in psychiatry. There's one way to look at everything, and that's it. It's okay to go to psychiatrists and ask for Paxil, whatever you think you need. And maybe that helps. And I know a lot of people, and I want to make sure that they, you know, if they were to listen, they know from my heart that I'm not judging them. If they feel that they need any kind of assistance in any way and they feel that this is helpful, whatnot, then that's good that there's an option. My problem is they don't treat it as an assistance. They treat it as an absolute need. And the fact that they make it almost impossible to get off these things, none of these people are trained to help people get off. So how is that healthy? I mean, even cancer patients, there's a recovery process, and there's a sense that, okay, now you're in remission and these things aren't going to occur anymore. You don't have to do chemotherapy forever. And how do they think that people's brains, see, that's the problem. The biomedical theory believes that the mind is inside the chemicals of the brain. They don't believe in this idea that, you know, of intention and vision, and none of those things outside that would suggest that the mind's influences are beyond the skulls. They don't believe it.
It's interesting because on one hand, you know, people who do have a connection to something else, which is in some way everyone, but those of us who are more open to it are a larger threat. We're a larger threat to the control mechanisms and the paradigms that want to keep everyone in line and in a cookie cutter sort of box.
Right.
Because on some level, we don't care. On some level, we're not fully attached.
Right.
The stronger we are on our spiritual path, the more we might have more faith. We might be less scared on some level. You know, we still have fears, but I think if we're committed to a spiritual path, then our life can't be fully revolving around our fears, because we have something else that we're actually committed to, and that we have that sense of spiritual assistance from something bigger than ourselves that can come along and help us with our mission. So in a way, we're these free entities that are a bigger threat. They're quite a big threat to anyone or any, you know, institution that's trying to control society. But the other interesting thing, paradoxically or ironically, however you want to say it, is that a lot of religions themselves as institutions do talk about these things. You know, they talk about prophecies, they talk about people talking to God, and they even tell us to put all of our faith in God, you know?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that even though this country and many modern countries do kind of come out of a Judeo-Christian religion or a monotheistic religion that does have that belief system of putting all of your faith in God. And as you say, what does God mean? It means something different to different people. You know, even if it's just a very general sense that there's some good force in the universe that we are to be putting our faith in. But then, you know, if you put that concept into an organized religion and make a lot of rules and kind of keep people in line by having these rules and these customs and traditions and all of that, then maybe it's like, okay, well, it's safe if it's in this box of a religion because we can still control it. But if you start to believe it too much and go too far afield from some kind of box where we can control you, then it's a threat, you know, and then you're dangerous.
The funny thing is, they want to be the religion. They want to be the only thing that people believe in. You know, you hear it all the time. This idea of early intervention of mental illnesses. You know, they want to catch it so young, and oh my God, that, you know, they're able to label kids as young as 3. Every time I hear it, I'm thinking to myself, that poor child who now cannot grow the way he needs to grow and also connect to that thing that is other, that is soul within. I remember one of the major things that I experienced when I came back from India, and after I had such a mystical experience over there, because of these antipsychotics, I was completely unable to, I guess, most people have this natural ability to like kind of talk to their own inner guidance system inside. You may not say it out loud, but people do it all the time when they're, walking around. They might, yeah, this is good for me, or maybe I want that, whatever. I wasn't able to think like that anymore. And that was so devastating to me because I said to myself, they took my inner voice away.
Yes.
And they're happy to do it. And in fact, that's one of the signs that their treatment is working.
Yeah.
So, that's what hurts me, because I feel like so many people, they're on the borderline where they're not being put in hospitals. You know what I mean? Like, say, what we experience, which you automatically know once you go on the inside that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the system. But if you're not on the inside and you have a cool psychiatrist,
right?
Maybe they're just cool and they go with what you want.
Sometimes the cool psychiatrists are the most dangerous.
Exactly.
I
mean, one of my psychiatrists that put me away 3 times without even seeing me, I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. And even the first time I forgave him. I'm like, okay, he really didn't understand, whatever. The second time I was like, maybe he ain't so cool. By the third time I was like, that's it. I'm going to sue him, but that never came to pass because it's almost impossible to get anywhere with the law because it's all wrapped up. They're protected by the law.
Yeah.
They're completely protected by the law.
Yeah.
You began getting your message out there early on. And how did you find that confidence to get your message out there? I know you start speaking at colleges. Like I that's where I'm in such awe of you, because I'm just beginning the journey, and I'm older than you. And I've been in the system longer, much longer, because you were able to get out early. How did that happen? I mean, how did you give yourself that confidence?
Well, the first thing that happened for me, I think I got very lucky, I should say, because I connected with the Freedom Center right away as I was still in the process of getting off of these drugs. And so I think having other people, like that feedback of other people who were going through things similar, who had gone through things similar, and then they were already speaking at colleges. So I just jumped right in and started telling my story. The other thing is, of course, I was 22, and I think, sometimes 22-year-olds can be pretty confident, or they're a little freer and like idealistic and excitable. I was very excited to tell my story. I definitely think, though, that having these other people around me who were a support system and who had a similar experience and who were tapped into this college network was a big help.
Yeah.
The other thing that helps me is writing, which I wasn't really able to do while I was on the meds for myself. I know some people can, but I kind of lost a lot of my writing voice when I was on those meds, although I did actually get some interesting sort of channeled poetry and songs and these other things that were coming like from somewhere else entirely.
Cool.
After that, though, I did the speaking at colleges and public speaking in general, but I also did a lot of writing after I went through all of that, because I felt like I had just lost a few years of my life as a writer. For me, since I was a teenager, I've written every day. And even if it's just writing in my journal, it's always just been so important for me to have a voice, to find my voice, to express myself, to say what I think, to find what I think, and to explore my own ideas by writing and share those with other people. So I started to write about everything I had gone through after I went through it. I self-published a book at that point about what I had gone through. And this was before self-publishing was really very easy to do. So I did it in a very low scale kind of way, local coffee store kind of thing. But I was writing poetry. I was self-publishing those books. And then eventually I got the opportunity to start blogging. So, since I started all of this in the early 2000s, blogging wasn't even quite a thing yet. And so like a lot of my evolution of my own voice went along with the evolution of opportunities on the internet, and then it became possible to easily self-publish a book at a certain point. And then I started working on that. But I did have the opportunity to blog on on the Mad in America website. And that was a really big help for my confidence, because I was able to write things and get a ton of positive feedback right away. I also had my own blog. I still do, but I had my own blog from pretty early on, where I would start to post my own writings. And I learned ways to get people to read them. Like I learned, ways to post them in a lot of Facebook groups and in a lot of other social media networks, where I would write a blog and then post it like everywhere to get as many people as I could to read it. Mm-hmm. So that was exciting for me also, because a lot of times I got very positive feedback almost instantly, because the blogging process is so instantaneous. And it was cool for me to have my own blog and to find these ways of getting people to read my blogs, so that it was very empowering. I could write something and then within a day have like hundreds of people read it and give me their comments. And often the comments were very positive. And then the Mad in America was another level, because even though I didn't have as much control, I couldn't just sometimes I was able to post it myself on Mad in America, but there was a sense that there were editors there and that they needed to accept it. But it was also a very targeted audience of people who already wanted to hear the types of things that I was writing.
Right.
So there were a lot of people there that really appreciated what I was writing, and they would email me and comment and tell me how much they appreciated it. So that was like a very good feedback loop that helped me to gain confidence. And then over the years, eventually I put all of my writings together into my book and edited it and, worked on that whole process, which was pretty overwhelming and scary in its own way too. But also with my book, I've gotten so much positive feedback. So it's been a really amazing thing for me as a writer, because I've identified as a writer like since day one. I wanted to be a published writer when I was 4 or something. Mm-hmm. So, in a lot of ways, I think psychiatry and the whole paradigm of psychiatry gave me something really important to write about and to speak about that I had gone through. It gave me an insight into this whole world where we need a lot of writers, we need a lot of speakers, we need as many people as possible who can access their own real voice and share it with the world. And in a lot of ways, what psychiatry does is it silences people like us who have something to say.
The psychiatric survivor movement, okay, since early on, as we discussed, you've been involved with being an activist in this area. Do you think that it's recently gained a little bit more momentum? I didn't see that much. Maybe it was because, listen, the internet, when I was in India, it was 94. We didn't have the internet. I was lucky I got home. You know what I mean? Like no phone, no nothing. So I associate a lot of my misinformation or being in the dark for so long with the lack of information that was given to me, or access, there was no access to this. And I think as time continued and we moved on and, whatever, it seemed to be, there's so much more information and I guess courageous people out there willing to tell their story, willing to also hold space for those who are going through it. Do you feel it's gaining momentum, having been in it for so long?
I definitely agree with what you're saying in the sense that the internet it's interesting just the evolution of how the internet has affected the psychiatric survivor movement. Mm-hmm. Because when I first started in this as an activist, it was mostly about going to live conferences. I was meeting a lot of the same people who had been involved in this activism for already a decade or two or more. Some much older people that had already been in this movement for their whole lives, almost like early electroshock survivors. Wow. Some are even no longer with us, at this point, and some are, and some, the ones that are quite a bit older. They're probably, in their 80s now. And, but it was a small movement. It felt like a family. And then the internet started to pick up and, we started to get more traction with these blogs. And I think that at that point the internet started to become, there were different forums, different blog spaces, podcasts, et cetera. And the internet started to become, and YouTube videos, the internet started to become a place where people could get information, they could get inspired, they could find help, they could find resources, they could find connections, peer support, things like that. And And it's definitely gotten more and more and more since then. But something that, I mean, this is just me thinking out loud, but I think in a way the movement has gotten quite dispersed since then also, because more and more and more and more people have a voice now. And, you know, these new generations where, I mean, for me, when I was a kid, everyone wasn't really being put on psych meds. As a teenager, it started with the SSRIs and then the stimulants. But it definitely wasn't the way it is now, where tons and tons of young kids are getting put on psych meds like it's normal. But it was starting to become normal for teenagers to be put on SSRIs. So it was just starting to become more normalized. But now, you know, there are all these young people who are surviving all of that and then telling their stories. So it feels like there are just a lot more voices, and I can't even keep up with all of these voices and these stories. I mean, I don't really try to, but I think what it is now is that there are so many stories, and, you know, there are probably more stories from the other side also of people saying, oh, these meds, you know, helped me and saved my life and something like that. So it's like, there are just all these stories, there's everything, and it can be harder to know what's a real voice and what's something that might be sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry because they pay for all kinds of indirect advertising, and, you know, certain publications take money from them and then use certain stories. So I think, you know, there's still all different stories, that types of stories we're hearing. But what I do think is that people have more access to information, more access to the kinds of stories that might, you know, put that light bulb on in their mind about what's possible, like we've been talking about. So it's kind of like everything on the internet right now. You can find whatever story you're looking for, but you have to know what story to look for.
Right. The one thing I do get concerned about is, as you say, there's so many voices out there that I feel many people, like, as exactly as you say, they are listening to what they feel is supporting what they believe. And I'm concerned only because one of the things that's out there most are studies, because I try to do that. I try to debunk studies and show that it's not anything but drug companies pushing this stuff for their own. And, you know, that concerns me because that's misinformation, or that's, you know, claiming knowledge and expertise behind something that only has to do with pushing, you know, a product. So not health related concerns for people. So I feel like that we're in this stage where a lot of people are finally, you know, gaining confidence and trying to do away with the system. But then there's that other group that, and again, there's no judgment here, because everyone needs to find their safety zone. You know what I mean? And if that's like, it's a temper. I just want to tell people and remind people that it is a state that you can work through, and it could be phase oriented rather than lifetime oriented.
Exactly.
These are concepts that need to be discussed, because you know what? Maybe if that was how we looked at it, psychiatrists would then be trained on how to get people off this stuff. You know, like right now, the paradigm is that, okay, well, drugs are the only way. And I guess that really just comes around to how you're so special, because in the end, what you are providing for people is something that's still not easily accessible. As much as information is easily accessible and they can hear the stories and whatnot, you actually have a wealth of knowledge for people who are specifically trying to get off psych meds. And that's because you put so much energy into it. You know, you really made it a life goal. And like I said, someone like me, I'm just so thankful, because I feel like a whole new world opened up, a place where there was just nothing but a black curtain. Suddenly, you know, I could look behind it and say, oh my gosh, like, look, there is a new life. There is something more for me. And I guess that's the message that I want, you know, people to realize that, you know what, if you have the support you need, you can do it. Physically, though, I think it's the most important thing, because I was always terrified, because I knew if I didn't have something in place, I would end up in their hands again, because, you know, my friends are good and I love them, and they've walked alongside me through many of these issues, but they can only do so much. And if I'm in a journey for a long time, the right thing to do seems to be giving me over to the people who are claiming to be experts. But really, in the end, I'm just getting handed over to the enemy. So that's why I believe so many people are scared to take the journey. But we have an expert. I know you took me on, and you advertise that you take on new clients. How can people get in touch with you? And, if you want to give them your website or contact info.
Yeah, my website is chayagrossberg.com. So that's my name, ChayaGrossberg.com. My email address, you can email me, is chayagrossberg@yahoo.com, or you can email through my website. And you can check out my blog on my website or on Mad in America. I have a YouTube channel as well. You can check me out on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Find me anywhere with my name. I'm the only Chaya Grossberg, pretty much. So if you search for me. You can also check out my book, Freedom from Psychiatric Drugs, which is on Amazon.
Get it on Amazon. Okay, awesome. And also, I do want to say one more thing about your book, because what's cool about it is that there's a workbook component, which I love because I'm a journal. I like to write journals. But I don't know how to ask myself the right questions sometimes. Sometimes when I write my journals, it's really just getting it out, stream of consciousness, trying to, and I can't always be the person who's asking the questions. And this almost feels like the right types of questions that if a counselor really cared, they would ask, and so that's just like another thing to throw into anyone who's interested in getting this book. It's not just, it's everything about the resources you need, but also it's about like going internally, and it's like a companion. I'm just so thrilled I have my hands on it right now. And
oh, thank you so much. It would be so great if counselors did use those questions at some point,
Well, hopefully. I have a few counselors who right now are extremely supportive, and they will be getting that. In fact, you may meet them soon, because I think I might have a Zoom with everybody. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
This is like a big thing here, it's a big project. I want everybody involved. I want to be the case study.
Yeah. And, I just want to say, like, I'm so excited to connect with you as well. Not only is it awesome that you're doing this podcast while going through all of this, but every time I talk to you, I'm so inspired by your energy and your enthusiasm and your inspiration to do this, because, not everyone has it.
Yeah. I think that right now in our lives and as people, we've decided that we want to be human, and people can relate and be inspired by that. So thank you so much for joining us and, for sharing your wisdom. And I really appreciate it. Chaya, thank you so much.
Yes. And thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.